this is something that I found out actually through a personal experience. I found out that in Miami-Dade, which is the county that I live, if there's if there's any sort of like battery or any sort of like, even if it's simple battery, and it's a domestic dispute, the person, I guess the perpetrator would get immediately just get sent to jail. Does anyone have any comments on that or can confirm
Oh, I
that?
thought you were gonna continue with
No,
your.
I stopped. That was a
I was like,
conversational pause. And everyone just stared at me. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but at least that's what I kind of I remember. That's what I more or less remember what the police officer said. He said that if the two individuals were living together and one individual hit the other, there's zero tolerance for that in Miami-Dade, and the person who hit the other person would immediately get sent to jail on the spot. Does anyone have any comments on that? Thoughts? Can anyone confirm that?
Did the officer said that it has to be proven?
Well,
It has to
I
be
would.
proven.
I assume that it would have to be proven, but
Yeah, it has to be proven. It's not like she hit me, and that's it. Then the other person goes to jail. It has to be some tie. Like if it makes, I don't know, but if it makes sense that the other person would, or normally it's beyond reasonable doubt. That's a really high standard. That is how like all this like battery, aggravated battery, sexual assault must be proven. It is very different from college, right? College under Title IX goes a little bit lower than that.
Yeah, hold on. Tell me about Title IX actually before you continue on. Can you explain to me what Title IX is?
Well, Title IX is basically protection for students and members of campus and different like colleges, and it's giving the opportunity to be protected against sexual assault or any type of sexual, including like from the simplest way to sexual harassment or like really harassing comments going up to assault, battery, hazing, anything. It's
so it includes
Title IX
hazing.
gives like a safe space and at the same time a just space for it to be heard, adjudicated.
And Title IX is exclusively for colleges?
No, if we go
workplace.
If we go, I would say let's dig it to colleges. If it gets outside of colleges, it can get really, yes, it has a really big, what would we say? A really big coverage.
Okay.
So for our audience, we can keep it to college if we want to win today.
Okay, because it reaches a lot. It reaches more than just colleges. So it covers,
it
okay.
Because basically Title IX, Title IX is a protection against discrimination on the basis of sex. So, and in that way, it's kind of broad. So, the Title IX only is like one or two sentences, Dory. It's not like what it encompasses is a lot, and it does have a lot of protections, but it doesn't specify specifically what discrimination may look like. So then that way it kind of lends itself to be able to say that, like, yes, sexual assault, sexual harassment, different stuff like that impedes a student's ability to have a kind of successful college experience in the context like we're talking about of college. So anything that discriminates against a person's ability to participate in an educational program or activity that receives federal funds, that would be determined to be protected under Title IX. So let's say you're like a sexual assault resulting on campus would be then a protection under Title IX because that's hindering your ability to go to school, that's hindering your academic potential. So in that way, the school is mandated to kind of deal with it, make sure that it's investigated and responded to, and then but it gives rights to the victim and the offender. Okay. So in that way, So it's not necessarily just a blanket statement that the person is automatically found guilty. The school goes through its own kind of judicial and conduct process for processing Title IX. So we have our own Title IX coordinators at FIU.
Actually, each college has its own
Yeah,
Title
yeah.
IX.
Mm-hmm.
Like just so like people get a sense of like how broad like Title IX is. Well, first it was like part of like a series of like education amendments in the 70s, like early 70s, and you know, originally it didn't have this purpose. But like what Title IX is kind of like more known for now is like increasing participation in like women's sports, and especially like K through 12. So like, you know, originally like having the issue of not having as much like funding within like women's sports, or them having like significantly like less like of a quality of equipment, like you can then like, you know, enact Title IX for that, and that would like protect that. So it goes from like that's why it's so broad when it's based on like gender discrimination. Like it goes from like, you know, protecting women in sports, and then also in regards to like rape and sexual assault.
And also certain programs. For example, it was understood that women go to education and, you know, teaching and literature. So for scholarships, for example, for women in STEM, right? Science, technology, mathematics, the scholarships available for women was really, let's not say non-existent, but really scarce. And also Title IX ensures that every program has a fair amount of each, right? Of women and of male, also the sports, and at the same time the different programs. So basically fairness in classrooms, in all access to education, in all realms of education, engineering. Oh, that was the other one that I was missing in STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, where women were not really welcomed in terms of economics, right? Because sometimes like it's not about, also it's not only about accepting women in these type of programs, but also funding, right? And scholarships. And at the same time, vice versa, right? A man can study psychology, a man can study education. And there are really good male teachers. So that is basically what the Title IX also encompasses. This is really big.
Yeah.
But what we want our audience to take today is that every college has a safe space to go and to be protected. And every accused, right? Every single accused has a space, also a free space, to state what happened and to defend his or her case. That is important.
Yeah, and I think along with that, it's important to also mention the rollbacks that have been done against Title IX as of recent. So the rollbacks.
Okay, get into that. Yeah, rollbacks.
So Title IX, obviously, we were talking about how it's established protecting
Is it messed up that I'm thinking about Walmart when you say rollbacks?
Yes. So rollbacks, even though these are not good rollbacks.
These are not good rollbacks.
Not good rollbacks.
No.
So
very bad.
Don't think Walmart. But so for these, they've imposed kind of new limitations, or new guidelines rather, on Title IX under the new our new Secretary
Limitations
of Education.
or guidelines? Be honest.
Both. It depends. It depends on it's guidelines, but you know, in terms of how you view it, it could be considered limitations. So those are mostly regarding the Title IX protections and investigations with sexual assault on campus. So these have reduced the need for confidentiality, that students must disclose the identity of the survivors to the offender. So the accused is now allowed to directly question the survivor. The schools can refuse to investigate off-campus misconduct, and then Title IX proceedings can be delayed now. And also the burden of proof has been kind of heightened, has increased. So now the standard of proof has to be higher in order for a person to be found guilty. So before it was more on the basis of protecting and believing survivors. And that's not to say that just because someone came with an accusation against another student, that student was automatically found guilty. You know, there was still a burden of proof that had to exist, but now that burden of proof on the victim has increased. And as we know with sexual assault and rape cases, there's a lot of instances where there might not be a witness. There might not be necessarily a rape kit that was done, or like a blood toxicology report to show that someone was drugged or inebriated during the event. So it kind of has reverted back to not believing the survivor.
Which is crazy to me, because why would it's crazy to me that it's still like the climate is still that you know, you doubt the survivor.
Yeah, and I think because what the Secretary of Education has put forth is what she said,
Betty
and
Ross,
which is yes, which I would like to say is completely untrue. That she said that that 90% of rapes and sexual assaults are false reports, which we know that false reporting is between 2 and 6% for rape and sexual assault cases, which is the exact same percentage it is for any other crime. So 2 to 6% of homicide accusations are false. 2 to 6% of robberies accusations are false. You know what I mean? So it's the same across all of these different crimes. So it's this false narrative that somehow survivors are coming forward with these false accusations as retaliation or regret for something that happened, when it's just not true. And in these rollbacks, you kind of are saying to survivors, you don't matter as much as, you know, as the offender, that this person's rights outweigh yours because, you know, they're students and they're upstanding. And I think that's usually, we've seen it a lot across court cases, like in the Brock Turner case and different stuff like that, where, oh, he's an upstanding member of his community. He's gonna go to a good college, and then they get offered a much better deal or sentencing than any person in those violent crimes should.
So I really want to get into what Christina was speaking about, the burden of proof, and like, where does that even come from in the first place, and why do we have like this general sentiment now? So like, the legal system's hostile treatment of rape cases and rape victims was unique in marked contrast to its response to other assault crimes. So like, with respect to rape, the legal system emphasized the victim's character, behavior, and words to ascertain whether the victim even consented. For other assault crimes, like, however, the legal system, like historically speaking, focused primarily on the actions of the accused to establish criminal activity. So for example, for like the crime of battery, it was established based solely on the perpetrator's actions, and or like, you know, the intent of the victim's response to being punched was considered irrelevant. So when it comes to assault, like, we don't
explain that. What do you mean being punched was irrelevant?
So like, for example, we'll say for assault, like, we're using being punched as an example, like, historically speaking, and even now, like, we don't question the victim, and it's like, oh, like, you know, did you consent to being punched? Like, we don't question that.
Yeah.
You don't question that. But when it, you know, all of a sudden it comes to sexual assault, like, we question the victim, like, oh, did you really want it? And that's what happened. That was what happened in the past, primarily then. And like, now we do have like more state laws that, you know, protect more against that. And of course, like, now I know, like, you know, you can't really bring up a victim's sexual history, but in the past, like, you did, and that was considered, that would get submitted as evidence, like what witnesses would say about the person's sexual history. So that's why you have like echoes of that today, of like, you know, we question like, oh, what has this person done before? You know, but did they really want it? You know, it's because we have this past where we did ask those questions in the legal system.
Yeah, I think honestly, just looking at Eliandro's face during that whole thing of just like disgust and confusion as why that is the case was a really good representation of where we're at right now. Like Krishna was talking about, it's been a long kind of historical process to even get to where we are in terms of believing victims, which I think is still lackluster in some circumstances. So
yeah, it's
But it is
really
important to
disappointing
tell.
how.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna finish off. Like it's disappointing with assault. We assume lack of consent. We just are like, oh yeah, nobody wants to get punched. But I think this also ties in with this general, belief that goes back beyond the U.S. legal system as far as how old it is, like of women being inherently deceptive. Like that's existed for
Yeah,
like
there's a lot of
years.
there's a lot of social issues intertwined. Is that the word I'm looking
intertwined.
for?
Yeah.
Yeah, intertwined with when it comes to these sort of things. Dory, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say that not because things have become tougher in the sense of proving a, a crime, because that is a crime. All of the things we have talked are considered crimes under Florida law. But not because someone experienced one of those crimes and say, oh, I don't have the proof, they are never going to believe me. Keep it out of, for example, Title IX. It is important to say that the standard of proof that the Title IX, like in schools, it is lower than the criminal law. So don't think, oh, because my case cannot be heard in court, for example, because I don't get all the elements, right? I don't get to prove intentionality. I don't get to prove actual contact, and I don't get to prove actual damages, right? Which are the elements of assault and battery. But assault, no, because assault, you don't need the contact of object body. It's just with the imminent apprehension that the thing is going to happen, that's considered assault, right? But let's suppose we don't get all the criminal elements in court, right? Don't let that discourage students to go to their Title IX coordinator and to get help and to explain the case, because the standard of proof for in colleges have gone from beyond reasonable doubt to a preponderance of the evidence. So basically, in simple terms, a preponderance of the evidence, it is like, is it more likely than not, right? Beyond reasonable doubt is like, there is no doubt that in no reasonable mind, this person can be innocent, right? However, in the preponderance of the evidence is it more likely than not? Okay. So although things got a little bit tougher to prove, and it is comprehensible also because that accusation of sexual assault, for example, that will never go away from someone. It's something that will follow that person for the rest of their lives. That person may be out of a job, right? And I'm not justifying that person, but I'm just putting the coin in both ways, right? In the place of the accuser, yeah, that person hurt me, that person made me feel shame, that person basically destroyed my feelings, and at the same time, in the accused, right, with such a accusation on that person's back, right, that doesn't go away ever. That is something that will never leave that person. So schools are like, before we actually put this burden into someone's back, let's make sure that we actually are doing it correctly. But let's not that deter victims from saying what happened, from reaching help, from helping the community, because by doing that is helping also the rest of the students, right, from that person and from people like that person.
I think the weight of the topic really has to be emphasized, because while the accused may have that black stain, the victim also has that, and that can never be undone, right? So, it's heavy stuff. But All right, someone else take it off because I'm tearing up. So
I think
throw
what's
something in there.
also important with Title IX, like Dory was saying, is to make sure that, you know, we're supporting victims. And what with the rollbacks, it comes with that universities are able to choose. So currently at FIU, I don't believe that we changed our standard of proof. It's maintained at the level that it was before the rollbacks. So universities are allowed to kind of choose now. So it's within their discretion to decide what if they're going to kind of accept these rollbacks. But these are now new guidelines that universities can follow.
So it's not. So it's the FIU has a choice to make, essentially.
Yeah, because every university, as long as it's following within the Title IX guidelines and specifications and requirements, it kind of then, just like we were talking about at the federal and state level, how the states kind of then have jurisdiction, as Dory was talking about, to determine, universities then kind of have their own jurisdiction to then go off of that and how they implement that. And so, for example, because basically the Title IX, it sets a minimum. So you can obviously be above the minimum. So if you want to have extremely strict and rigorous process and very punitive punishments for people found guilty and stuff like that, that's kind of your prerogative as a university, as long as you're meeting the minimum requirement.
Okay. So then, I guess shifting the conversation just to our last little segment here, stalking. Can someone who knows the legal definition for stalking?
Have it. So in Florida, stalking is considered a person who willfully, maliciously, and repeatedly follows, harasses, or cyberstalks another person, commits the offense of stalking, a misdemeanor of the first degree. It then turns into third-degree felony when it becomes aggravated. It violates an injunction, which is kind of a different version, or for reference, it's kind of like a restraining order. Or if the victim is 16 or under. Because
they don't call restraining orders aren't called restraining orders here, right? They're called injunctions instead, right?
And then it also has provisions for cyber stalking. So to engage in a course of conduct to communicate or to cause to be communicated words, images, or language by or through the use of email or electronic communication directed at a specific person, or access or attempt to access the online accounts or home electronic systems of another person without their permission. So that's kind of the Florida statute, obviously in this time of age that we're in with technology, cyber stalking has been included now. So stalking has to be, as the statute puts it, has to be repeated. So it's not just one instance, but it has to be a repeated acts and intent to then, and maliciously. So the word there is very specific in order to constitute stalking.
Does anyone know the percentage, I guess some statistics on like how often stalking is reported and why it might not be reported?
I think in terms of it not being reported, that I'm trying to find the specific statistics for you right now. But in terms of it not being reported, I think a lot of times victims of stalking will kind of just pass it off in terms of.
You think it's underreported?
I think it's underreported.
I think it's less than 15%. Actually, it is underreported. It's less than 15%. So it is totally underreported. And people may confuse that with, that person is just in love with me, for example, because it normally comes from rejection. So people may say, oh, that's not stalking. That is, that person is just in love. But if I don't pay attention, that will go away. Right? Yeah. If I don't pay attention, if I don't follow, she will get tired or he will get tired. That's it. I will just let it go.
Yeah, and I think with like these types of crimes that we've been discussing today, that we always think it's some stranger, like some scary man in the bushes.
But very good point to bring this up.
And with stalking, it's very often like what Dory was saying, like a form of rejection or like a former partner is very common. And that's why people won't report it, because it's like their ex-girlfriend or their
And it could also be perceived rejection. The person.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, also perceived rejection. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So people, they won't report it. They'll just view it as like an obsession, but yeah, so ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends are probably the most common for stalking.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's underreported in a lot of cases. And also across these subjects that we've talked about, they kind of all fall into that it's like we were talking about, it's usually an acquaintance or partner. So like for rape, acquaintance and like partner rape is the most common form. And then we see in stalking also that, I mean, obviously in domestic violence, it's usually between a partner or people that know each other. But in stalking also, you see it's usually that person has some type of connection. It doesn't necessarily have to be a partner. It could be someone from class, someone who saw you, stuff like that. So but there is usually some type of tie between the individuals, whether one individual knows it or not. But so I think in that sense, stalking, and I think a lot of people they see these behaviors, but then they might not put them together in the sense of stalking, or it's just, I'm just uncomfortable, this isn't anything, until obviously that it escalates and it becomes, aggravated stalking, which then becomes a felony. And then obviously, if you're violating an injunction, if that person has an injunction against you, and then it operates differently within FIU as well. So FIU has its own kind of standards that it assesses, and it can help you with that process, like through VEP. But if FIU is involved in the sense that, because they need to be aware of the situation, whether that student's allowed on campus, if that person's allowed on campus, where on campus they're allowed to be. So kind of at the university level for colleges, it works between the student code of conduct and their rules, and then also the overarching like statutes from that state.
Okay, and then with that, I guess we can start wrapping this up. But does anyone have, I guess, any final thoughts on the subject? Any policy?
I would say, if I may interrupt you,
no, go ahead.
Is that since we started, one of the first words we said here was about jurisdictions, right? And how each state goes out from the federal government and has its own way to define things and its own way to punish things. The same thing within the state, right? Colleges and universities, especially RFIU, has its own way of dealing with things. So any person that may feel that one of these crimes that we talked today could be a victim of them, it is important to go and find support within the Title IX coordinator in that office. It is really important because as we said before, it doesn't matter if we don't actually have the elements of a criminal case. It is perfectly fine to go to the Title IX coordinator and report it. And let's suppose that that person doesn't want to report it. It is also important to find mental health. And one of the things I would like to mention before we leave is the confidentiality that mental health professionals have with victims of sexual assault and other crimes related to sexual contact. It is against the law that these mental health providers or trained volunteers disclose what is said in those conversations, right? Or in those therapies. So our VEP department, it is basically a safe haven. And when we say a safe haven, it's the place to go and disclose without ever having any fear that it is going to, if I say it is going to go to the police. If the person doesn't want to, the mental counsel professional cannot talk about it, cannot report it, cannot mention it to anyone. And even if the case go to the police, the law has its privilege, and it's privileged information. So unless the victim authorizes the mental health professional to disclose that precise conversation, that cannot come into a police report, into an actual lawsuit. So that's what I wanted. I didn't want this program to end without mentioning that there is some hope, and there is protection, and there is legal protection within FIU, and there is mental protection within FIU.
Okay. And then with that, if no one else has anything else to say, then it's a wrap.
I'll just say that victim empowerment program.
I have something to say.
I did. Sorry. Victim empowerment program has tons of resources for individuals that have suffered from victimizations of all different types that we talked about today, and even more than that. And I know today we talked about a lot sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking perpetrated against women, but it can be perpetrated against any gender on the gender spectrum. That's not to invalidate that male victims at all. Male victims are equally protected under our Florida statutes, federal law. Like I said, we've changed from carnal knowledge of the female to now that everyone's included. So I think that would be the main takeaway, that I don't want people to suffer in silence because they don't think that they're protected. They're protected. And as an FIU student, you have amazing resources available to you. And they'll link you to ones outside of the FIU community as well in the greater Miami area. So.
Perfect. Yes, that's exactly thank you for mentioning that. I'm glad you did. Because regardless of race, regardless of gender, race and gender, these things can happen to anybody. So with that, unless Krishna, you have something to say?
Well, I got a couple sentences. I won't make you nervous. I'll be talking too long. But
no, don't worry. This is like a 7-parter at this point. It doesn't matter. Go off.
We haven't been going for that long.
Go off.
But what I was gonna say is that although we talked about today, like a lot of the hardships that victims will go through, like once they, take steps within the legal system or even like within their school, that shouldn't let anyone from being discouraged to coming forward. So, like, yes, there are challenges present being a victim, and especially like going through the process, but there are protections. Like there are like advocates. We do have like our VEP advocates, for example, like at FIU. So again, like don't let it discourage you, and like you can come forward if that person would like to, and that's 100% their choice. On that note.
And okay, with that, we'll close off this long but justified podcast. I like that this was a longer one, probably multiple parters. But yeah, so thank you, kind peer educators, for joining me in this conversation, in this lengthy, big word containing conversation. And thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Bye. Hi, my name is Eli. My name has not changed since the last time you've seen me. And today we'll be talking about the Victim Empowerment Program from a legal perspective. And that is Krishna. She joined without me telling her to, so that's interesting to me.
No, you said come on in.
Oh my God, I did. That's okay. It is a mess today, but the topics we're talking about are not messy. Sometimes they're messy. Oh God, we have to cut that out too.
Should I just leave?
No, just stay. Just stay until everything else gets in.
I follow directions. I don't know what you want from me.
You did follow directions. I can't believe I put come on in. I didn't put come on in. You read the chat wrong. That I put that earlier.
No, I swear I just saw it load.
No. Okay, leave and come back. I'll let you know when I come back.
Okay.